Chapter 1 A Woman Possessed. Well, I declare, said Aunt Queenie, that father of mine's left the lid off the sugar bowl, and now ants are invading my kitchen. I glanced up from my wood carving project and saw her jabbing furiously at black dots on the counter. Death to you, she cried, and you, and you, and you. Her hand was a blur of wristwatch and lavender nail polish, and I couldn't help but grin. This must be the first army in history to be wiped out with one finger. Delrita Jensen, she said, frowning at me over her shoulder, it's not funny. These insects could carry any number of diseases. We don't know where they've been. Sorry. I ducked my head, letting my long brown hair hide the smile that I couldn't wipe off my face. Aunt Queenie was a germ warrior, and the whole house was her battleground. Peeking out from beneath the hair, I watched as she waged war against the dots. Her necklace and earrings lay in a shiny purple heap on the counter, and she'd tied an apron around her waist. Other than that, she was still dolled up in the outfit she'd worn for her volunteer shift at the crisis center, a royal purple dress with matching high-heeled shoes. Her straw-colored hair was tortured into a top knot, which sat like a bird's nest on her head. From the nest protruded her trademark, a pencil. Today's pencil was purple to match her outfit. After wetting a sponge at the sink, she went back to the ants. I don't know why that man can't remember to put a lid on a sugar bowl, she said, raking the sponge across the counter to gather up the bodies in one fell swoop. I kept my eye on her as she cleaned behind the canister set and straightened each piece so the flower motifs faced front. Aunt Queenie's world would stop spinning if those flowers weren't in perfect alignment. The coffee is a smidgen off center, I said with a straight face. She moved the coffee can a fraction of an inch. Is that better? Now the tea. She adjusted the tea can. Now turn the coffee a teensy bit to the left. That's back where I started, she said, turning the coffee again. I shrugged. Maybe you had it right in the first place. She cast me a look of exasperation, then tilted her head and checked the flower motifs. Satisfied that all were centered, she rinsed out her sponge at the sink. With the water running, she didn't hear when a kettle boiled over on the stove. I jumped up, turned down the burner, and yanked off the lid with a hand wrapped in the tail of my oversized t-shirt. Pot roast, I whooped. Then I saw the pan of creamy yellow liquid just starting to bubble. And lemon pudding? Wow! What's going on? Why the super supper? Aunt Queenie wrinkled her nose in distaste. Supper is such a backwoods expression. You know I prefer to call it dinner. Okay, so it's dinner, but red meat and dessert on the same night? Aunt Queenie, I dream about meals like this. I even count hamburgers to fall asleep. Such melodrama, Delrita. You should be on the stage. I'm trying to find out what's up your sleeve. Her answer was a wait-and-see smile. That might work on an 8-year-old rattling a Christmas present. To me, age 14, it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. I opened my eyes wide, as though I'd just figured out one of life's important truths. Oh, I know, I said, patting my skinny hips. You've been saying my jeans are falling off. You're afraid I'll drop my drawers tonight at the nursing home. Aunt Queenie's painted-on eyebrows arched upward. Why, declare, Delrita, drop your drawers? What a thing to say. I sat back down at the table and picked up my knife, pleased at myself for getting a rise out of her. She was always so serious about everything, and I was always trying to loosen her up. You'd think she'd have gotten used to me in 7 months, but I could still shock her from the top of that bird's nest to the soles of her purple high-heeled shoes. Aunt Queenie's real name was Queen Esther, after a famous queen in the Bible, and she sometimes could be a royal pain. For me, getting occasional rises out of her played a part of my survival. She had no children of her own, but she had me now because Uncle Bert, my mother's brother, was my legal guardian. My being here wasn't a matter of choice for any of us. One minute I was a kid with 2 loving parents, and the next, I was an orphan. Orphan, what an ugly word. I'd gladly rip that page from the dictionary, but I still wouldn't have Mom and Dad. Uncle Bert says the Lord doesn't give a person more burdens than he can bear. But I wonder sometimes if there was a mix-up of records in heaven. Less than 3 months after I lost Mom and Dad, I lost Punky, my uncle with Down syndrome. Lost. Not an ugly word, but misleading. I didn't lose anybody. They just died. Mom and Dad were killed in a car accident last September. Punky's heart, weak since birth, stopped beating last December. Punky was 35 years old, but because he'd had the mind of a child, he was more like my little brother than my uncle. The three people I love most in the world have been taken from me in 3 months' time, and if that's not a mix-up in burden records, I don't know what is. Mentally, I gave myself a shake, unwilling to let depression get its hooks in me, because sometimes it wouldn't let go. I went back to whittling my trumpeter swan and waited for the calming of my soul. Carving could do that for me. I hadn't had much say in anything else that happened in my life, but carving gave me a sense of control. Like the gouges and V-tools laid out on a folded bath towel before me, my knife was razor sharp, for the simple reason that it's easier to guide a sharp tool than a blunt one. The towel was there to catch the swan, which I would drop if I cut myself. I don't mind bleeding now and then, but I try never to stain the basswood. The swan's wingspan was only 6 inches, and its neck was no bigger around than a matchstick. At this stage, I needed to make tiny, precise cuts, so I pulled the knife blade toward me instead of pushing it sharp side out. My mood had just begun to level off when Aunt Queenie walked over behind me and touched me on the shoulder. Del Rita, I don't know how you do it. That swan looks like any minute it could just take off and fly. I nodded, scooted wood shavings into a pile with my finger, and wiped my hand on my Levi's. It's a shame you aren't sharing your talent with others, she said. As a member of the advisory board, I'm inviting you to display your carvings at the nursing home. No way, I said, easing away from her and the cloying scent of her lilac perfume. Aunt Queenie, so active in community affairs, was used to the spotlight. I never wanted to be the center of attention. The residents would enjoy your work, she persisted, and the board would appreciate your cooperation. With these new programs, we're bringing the young and the old together so they can learn from each other. Aunt Queenie, what you're doing for the old folks is a good thing. They probably love the accordion player and that calypso group, and they're sure to love the clown tonight. But do me a favor and forget about me. I'm not interested in showing my wood carvings at the nursing home or any place else. I carve for my own enjoyment, not to let the whole world know. My, aren't you the Shirley one this afternoon, she said, brushing a few wood splinters into her palm and heading for the cabinet. I'm sorry, it's just that my carving is private and personal, and I'm real choosy about the people I share it with. Why, I declare, Del Rita, I thought teenagers were concerned with their image, but here you are still hiding your light under a bushel. And you're hiding trash under the sink, I mused as she tossed the splinters into the can and I closed the cupboard door. I missed home, where the trash can had sat in plain sight by the stove. I missed the times I'd help Mom in the kitchen. Aunt Queenie liked for me to do my carving while she cooked, but she seldom needed help from me. Her kitchen was equipped with every appliance known to man. As if to verify that, she switched on the dustbuster to clean a few crumbs off the floor. I sighed. I'd been more or less thrown into the lap of luxury when I moved in with her and Uncle Bert. They spoiled me, maybe because I'd lost my parents, or maybe because I was the child they could never have. Or maybe, and this was the biggie, because I was a job they'd been given and they were determined to do it well. My thoughts were drawn to the cross-stitch picture hanging above the kitchen phone. Home is where your loved ones are. It's where you hang your heart. It was a nice sentiment, but it didn't make everything rosy. That picture was there for looks, like the cold fireplace in the living room. Aunt Queenie returned the dustbuster to the utility closet and came out shaking her head. Pop's messier than a 2-year-old, dropping crumbs all over the house. The man spent years in the army keeping things in tip-top shape, but all of a sudden he doesn't care about appearances at all. I declare, sometimes I think he's deliberately trying to make things harder for me. I glanced at Orvis Roebuck snoozing in the family room, a gorilla in Aunt Queenie's jungle of hanging plants. Beside him on the table was a pack of chewing tobacco, because he had heart trouble and emphysema, and he had to chaw his nicotine instead of puffing cigarettes. I felt sorry for Mr. Roebuck, but I didn't like him, and he had no use for me. His Sunday visits hadn't been so bad, but then he'd moved in 2 weeks ago on April Fool's Day. After that, he clammed up and wouldn't talk much to me. However, he always had plenty to say to Aunt Queenie, and it was usually something grouchy. I imagined him staying awake nights thinking up ways to irritate her. I almost couldn't blame him. In his own house, he'd been the man in charge. In this house, he was a misfit like me. Aunt Queenie washed her hands, then poured the lemon pudding into a pie crust. Pop's always been contrary, she said. It's second nature to him after all his years of giving orders. Since Mama died, he's gotten worse. If you ask me, he'd gotten worse in the last 2 weeks. I heard his wheezy muttering, saw him get up and search among the plants. I knew that any second he'd be yelling for a spit can, which Aunt Queenie had hidden in the magazine rack. Sure enough, he roared, "Queen, where'd you put it this time?" "Pull up, Pop. My spit can, Dad Blummett." "Oh, that nasty thing." Aunt Queenie rolled her eyes at me. It was a terrible sacrifice for her to allow him to chew tobacco in the house, and she despised that spit can. Still, the can was better than having him stand at the front door and gob on the porch. Come to think of it, the spitting could be why he didn't like me. I'd caught him gobbing into Aunt Queenie's prize-winning Diefenbachia, and although I hadn't titled yet, he never knew when I might. I was keeping an eye on the Diefenbachia, because if it died, Aunt Queenie would have a royal fit. "Well, where is it?" gargled Mr. Roebuck in the doorway. His left cheek was puckered by a scar, and tobacco juice was dribbling down his chin on that side. His thick gray hair, sheared off in a military cut, stood up like bristles on a brush. He was wearing sharply creased fatigue pants and a sleeveless undershirt, and his forearms were tattooed, a perfect rose on the left one and a crudely lettered babe on the right. How this man could have fathered Aunt Queenie was beyond me. I wondered if her mother was Babe and if she'd been some kind of saint to marry him. Saint Babe, the mother of Queen Esther. The thought made me smile. "Your spit can's in the magazine rack," Aunt Queenie said. "You left it by your chair with the lid off again, and Del Rita came within an inch of kicking it over." "Carelessness." Mr. Roebuck grunted from the good side of his mouth. "Kids these days have their heads in the clouds." After sharing that bit of wisdom, he disappeared into the family room. With a loud crack, Aunt Queenie demolished an egg on the edge of the sink and dumped the whole gooey mess into the garbage disposal. Wow, it wasn't like her to waste food or to lose her cool. "I hope Tanglenut gets that new psychiatric hospital," she muttered, breaking another egg and carefully separating the white from the yolk. "I'll be needing it when Pop drives me nuts." "Maybe they'll let us share a room," I said. She grinned at me, and for a moment I felt a glimmer of kinship between us. The same kinship we'd had during Punky's last days of life. When the doctor confessed he couldn't do anything but keep Punky comfortable in the hospital, we'd brought him home, where he was surrounded by the belongings he treasured and the people he loved. Uncle Bert and I had kept watch over Punky, but it was Aunt Queenie who shaved and washed and fed him, bought him presents, even arranged for a visit from Santa Claus. Punky died with a smile on his face. "I hope this works," said Aunt Queenie as she separated another egg. "You mean the meringue?" I asked. "I mean the pie and pot roast." She touched the pencil in her hair, a sure sign that she'd been thinking hard on his subject and figuring all the angles. "Okay, Aunt Queenie, fess up. What's going on in your head?" Her expression was cagey as she fingered the pencil again. "They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, and I intend to get through to Pop. Mama always made a pie when she wanted to sweeten his disposition. Lemon meringue is his favorite." Why am I not surprised? I thought. Lemon pie for a sourpuss. Aunt Queenie plugged in her electric mixer with a flourish. "I know it hurt Pop's pride to lose his independence, and pride's always been a big thing with him. I've given him 2 weeks to get used to us, and he's been a slob the whole time. Since we all have to live under the same roof, I'm going to ask that he make a few concessions." "Such as?" I said, already sensing the fireworks. "Such as keeping a civil tongue in his mouth, not spitting on the porch, and not leaving whiskers in the sink. Such as lifting the toilet seat so he doesn't splatter." With a gleam in her eye, Aunt Queenie turned on the mixer and went after those egg whites like a woman possessed. I angled my eyes toward our father in the living room. That old man didn't stand a chance.